It was a chilly autumn morning, the kind where the air feels crisp and sharp against your skin. Marcus Johnson, a well-respected state attorney known for his dedication to justice, stepped out of his car in front of the courthouse. He adjusted, his tie picked up his leather briefcase filled with case files, and began walking briskly toward the entrance. Today was an important day. He had a hearing scheduled for a high-profile corruption case, and he needed to be fully prepared. Little did Marcus know that this ordinary morning would turn into one of the most surreal experiences of his life. As Marcus approached the security checkpoint at the courthouse, two FBI agents standing nearby exchanged glances. They were part of a special task force assigned to monitor potential threats around government buildings. Up until now, their morning had been uneventful, just another routine patrol. But something about Marcus caught their attention. To them, he looked like any other man heading into the courthouse, except for the color of his skin. One of the agents leaned closer to his colleague and whispered something into his radio. Within seconds, two more officers appeared, their eyes locked on Marcus as if they were waiting for him to make a move. Marcus noticed the sudden shift in atmosphere but thought nothing of it at first. He had seen law enforcement personnel stationed around courthouses countless times before. It wasn't unusual for there to be extra security measures in place, especially during hearings involving sensitive cases. Still, he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was different today. As he reached the metal detector, he placed his briefcase on the conveyor belt and waited patiently for the machine to scan his belongings. When the light flashed green, signaling no issues, Marcus grabbed his things and started moving forward. But just as he took a step past the checkpoint, one of the agents stepped directly into his path. "Sir," the agent said firmly, blocking his way. "We need to speak with you." Confused, Marcus stopped in his tracks, his brow furrowed as he looked at the agent. "Is there a problem?" he asked politely, though irritation was already creeping into his voice. The agent didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at his partner before turning back to Marcus. "Can you tell us why you're here today?" he asked, his tone clipped and suspicious. Marcus blinked, taken aback by the question. Wasn't it obvious? He was dressed in a tailored suit, carrying a professional-looking briefcase and standing inside a courthouse, a place where attorneys like himself worked every single day. "I'm here for a hearing," Marcus replied calmly, trying not to let his frustration show. "I'm the state attorney assigned to this case." To prove his point, he pulled out his identification card from his wallet and held it up for the agents to see. The badge clearly stated his name, profession, and affiliation with the state attorney's office. Anyone familiar with the legal system would recognize its authenticity instantly. But instead of easing their concerns, showing his ID only seemed to make the agents more suspicious. One of them squinted at the card, then looked back at Marcus as if comparing the photo to his face. "This says you're a state attorney," the agent said slowly, his tone laced with doubt. "Do you have any other proof?" Marcus felt his patience wearing thin. "Proof? My ID is issued by the state, isn't that enough?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "Look, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm running late for my hearing. Can we hurry this up?" The agents ignored his request. Instead, they began asking even more invasive questions. "What's in the briefcase?" one of them demanded, pointing to the sleek leather bag Marcus was holding. Without waiting for permission, they gestured for him to open it. Reluctantly, Marcus complied, laying the contents out on a nearby table. Inside were neatly organized folders, documents related to the case he was handling, and a few pens. Nothing unusual or threatening. Yet, the agents sifted through everything meticulously, flipping through pages and inspecting each item as though they expected to find something incriminating. While all of this was happening, Marcus couldn't help but notice how differently others were being treated. A white woman walked past the security desk, her large tote bag barely receiving a second glance from the guards. She breezed through, without so much as a pause, while Marcus, a black man dressed impeccably and armed with official documentation, was being subjected to intense scrutiny under the assumption that he posed some sort of threat. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a representative of the very system these men claimed to protect, and yet he was being profiled based solely on the color of his skin. His mind raced with memories of stories he'd heard over the years. Stories of racial profiling plaguing communities across the country. Friends, family members, colleagues, all had experienced similar situations at some point in their lives. And while Marcus had always sympathized with their struggles, experiencing it firsthand left him feeling both angry and powerless. How could this still be happening in 2023? Hadn't society progressed beyond such blatant discrimination? The crowd around them was growing larger by the minute. People passing by stopped to watch the spectacle unfold, whispering among themselves. Some looked concerned, while others seemed amused or indifferent. Marcus tried to ignore the stares, focusing instead on maintaining his composure. He reminded himself that losing his temper wouldn't solve anything. It might even make the situation worse. But the longer the agents delayed him, the harder it became to stay calm. Finally, one of the agents spoke up, breaking the tense silence. "You understand we're just doing our job, right?" he said, almost defensively. Marcus clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. Doing their job? Was this really what protecting the public looked like? Before he could respond, however, a familiar voice called out from behind the crowd. "What's going on here?" the voice demanded, cutting through the murmurs like a knife. Everyone turned to see Judge Thompson, a respected colleague and mentor of Marcus's, striding toward them. The judge's presence commanded immediate respect, and the agents instinctively straightened up as he approached. "Agent?" Judge Thompson addressed the lead officer, his voice firm yet measured. "Can someone explain to me why my colleague is being detained?" The question hung heavy in the air, forcing the agents to reconsider their approach. For the first time since the encounter began, they seemed unsure of themselves. One of them hesitated before responding. "We're conducting routine checks, Your Honor, just ensuring everyone's safety." Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Routine checks, you say?" he repeated, glancing between Marcus and the agents. Then, without waiting for further explanation, he gestured for Marcus to step aside with him. As they moved away from the crowd, Marcus exhaled deeply, finally allowing himself to relax, if only slightly. This ordeal wasn't over yet, but having someone in his corner made him feel less alone. The hallway outside the courtroom, once bustling with activity, now felt eerily quiet. The murmurs of onlookers who had gathered to witness the unfolding scene created a low hum in the background, but it did little to mask the tension hanging thick in the air. Marcus stood tall, trying his best to maintain his composure despite the rising frustration bubbling inside him. He knew losing his temper wouldn't help. This wasn't the first time he'd been treated unfairly because of his race. But that knowledge didn't make the situation any easier to endure. Judge Thompson's arrival had brought a temporary halt to the chaos. The seasoned jurist surveyed the scene with a mixture of disbelief and concern etched across his face. When his eyes landed on Marcus, still surrounded by agents and visibly irritated, the judge immediately sensed something was amiss. "Agent," Judge Thompson addressed the lead officer, his voice firm yet measured. "Can someone explain to me why my colleague is being detained?" The question hung heavy in the air, forcing the agents to reconsider their approach. One of them hesitated before responding. "We're conducting routine checks, Your Honor. Just ensuring everyone's safety." His tone was defensive, almost as if he were trying to justify their actions even though they clearly hadn't followed proper protocol. But Judge Thompson wasn't buying it. With a flick of his wrist, he gestured for Marcus to step aside with him. Once out of earshot of the agents, the judge turned to Marcus. "This isn't the first time something like this has happened, is it?" he asked quietly, his expression softening slightly. Marcus shook his head, his frustration evident in every line of his face. "No, sir. But I never imagined it would happen here, of all places," he replied, his voice tinged with bitterness. Judge Thompson nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of what Marcus was saying. Courts were meant to be pillars of justice, fairness, and equality. Yet here they were, witnessing firsthand how systemic biases could infiltrate even these sacred spaces. "Let's settle this quickly," Judge Thompson said after a moment of silence. Turning back to face the agents, he added, Gentlemen, allow me to clarify something. This man is State Attorney Marcus Johnson. He's here to present evidence in a high-profile case. If you have concerns about security, perhaps you should focus your efforts elsewhere. The agents exchanged uneasy glances, realizing too late the gravity of their mistake. They had misjudged Marcus based solely on his appearance, failing to recognize his role or credentials until someone of authority intervened. Reluctantly, one of them muttered an apology and stepped aside, allowing Marcus to proceed. But the damage had already been done. As Marcus followed Judge Thompson into the courtroom, he couldn't shake off the bitter taste of humiliation lingering in his mouth. Inside the courtroom, Marcus tried to push aside the earlier encounter and focus on the task at hand. Today's hearing involved a major corruption scandal involving local officials, and the stakes were high. The room was packed with lawyers, reporters, and members of the public, eager to see how the case would unfold. Despite the pressure, Marcus took a deep breath and reminded himself why he had chosen this career in the first place: to fight for justice and hold wrongdoers accountable. As the proceedings began, Marcus laid out the evidence piece by piece, his professionalism shining through despite the emotional toll of the morning's events. His arguments were clear, concise, and backed by solid facts. By the end of the session, even opposing counsel couldn't deny the strength of his case. When the judge commended Marcus for his thorough preparation and compelling presentation, a small sense of vindication washed over him. At least in this space, his expertise and dedication spoke louder than prejudice. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed him, eager to hear details about the case. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust toward him, and questions came rapid fire. "Mr. Johnson, can you comment on the allegations against the defendants?" one reporter asked. "How confident are you about securing a conviction?" Another chimed in. For a brief moment, Marcus forgot about the incident at the entrance and focused on answering their queries. But then, a young journalist from a local news outlet raised her hand timidly. "Sir, we heard there was an issue at the courthouse entrance earlier today. Can you tell us what happened?" she asked, her voice hesitant but curious. The question caught Marcus off guard. He paused, weighing his words carefully before responding. "While I appreciate the importance of security measures," he began, choosing each word deliberately, "it's crucial that such protocols are applied fairly and without bias. What happened today was a reminder that systemic issues persist, even in spaces meant to uphold justice." His statement struck a chord, sparking conversations among the reporters and prompting nods of agreement from some in the crowd. Later that evening, as Marcus sat alone in his office reflecting on the day's events, he realized that this wasn't just about him. It was about every individual who had ever been judged not by their actions or character, but by the color of their skin. Determined to make a difference, he decided to use his platform to advocate for change. This experience would not define him. It would fuel him. That night, unable to sleep, Marcus picked up his phone and scrolled through social media. To his surprise, videos of the courthouse incident had gone viral. People were sharing their outrage, tagging him in posts and calling for accountability. Some shared their own stories of racial profiling, expressing solidarity and support. Others praised his calm demeanor during the confrontation, saying it inspired them to stand up against injustice. One tweet in particular caught his eye. It read, "If a state attorney can be racially profiled at a courthouse, where else is safe? Justice for all." The hashtag had gained traction, trending nationwide within hours. Reading those words, Marcus felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also hope. Maybe this incident could serve as a catalyst for meaningful change. Maybe people were finally ready to listen. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work early, determined to channel his energy into action. He drafted an email to his colleagues, outlining ways they could address implicit biases within the legal system. He suggested mandatory training sessions, open forums for discussing discrimination, and partnerships with civil rights organizations. By midday, he had received dozens of responses, many expressing support for his ideas. Word of the incident reached the FBI headquarters later that afternoon. Internal Affairs launched an inquiry into the agents' conduct, promising to investigate whether their actions constituted racial profiling. While Marcus appreciated the acknowledgement, he knew apologies and investigations weren't enough. Real change required systemic reform, and he vowed to play a part in making that happen. Over the following weeks, Marcus became increasingly vocal about the need for reform. He attended town hall meetings, wrote op-eds, and collaborated with advocacy groups to raise awareness about racial profiling. His story gained traction, resonating with many who had faced similar injustices. At one particularly impactful event, Marcus shared his experience at the courthouse, emphasizing the emotional toll it took on him. Imagine walking into a place where you're supposed to find fairness and equality, only to be treated as if you don't belong, he told the audience. That's what racism feels like. It strips away your dignity and reminds you that no matter how far you rise, certain biases will always try to pull you down. His advocacy efforts caught the attention of lawmakers, prompting discussions about implementing stricter guidelines to prevent discriminatory behavior in public institutions. While progress was slow, Marcus remained hopeful. He knew that real change wouldn't happen overnight, but every conversation, every policy proposal, brought society one step closer to true justice. The days following the courthouse incident were a whirlwind for Marcus Johnson. His story had spread like wildfire, capturing headlines across newspapers, television networks, and social media platforms. People from all walks of life, lawyers, activists, students, and ordinary citizens, were talking about what happened to him. Some praised his calm demeanor during the confrontation, while others expressed outrage at the blatant racial profiling he endured. For Marcus, however, the attention was bittersweet. On one hand, it validated his experience and shed light on an issue that affected countless individuals daily. On the other hand, it forced him to relive the humiliation and frustration of being treated like a suspect in a place where he should have felt respected. Despite the chaos surrounding him, Marcus remained focused on his work. He continued preparing for upcoming cases, determined not to let the incident derail his responsibilities as a state attorney. But every time he walked into a courtroom or passed through security at another courthouse, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. Would this happen again? Would people ever see past his skin color and recognize him for who he truly was? A professional dedicated to upholding justice? One afternoon, as Marcus sat in his office reviewing case files, there was a knock on his door. Without waiting for a response, Judge Thompson entered, closing the door softly behind him. The older man carried an air of authority but also warmth, something Marcus had always admired about him. "Do you have a moment?" the judge asked, taking a seat across from Marcus's desk. Marcus nodded, setting aside the papers in front of him. "Of course, Your Honor. What can I do for you?" Judge Thompson leaned forward slightly, folding his hands together. "I wanted to check in with you," he said. "How are you holding up after everything that's happened?" Marcus hesitated before answering. Truthfully, he wasn't sure how he felt. Part of him was angry, not just at the agents who profiled him, but at the system that allowed such biases to persist. Another part of him was exhausted, tired of constantly having to prove himself in spaces where he should already belong. "I'm managing," Marcus finally replied, choosing his words carefully. "It's frustrating, though. I keep thinking about all the people who don't have a platform like I do. What happens when someone without influence gets treated the same way? Who speaks up for them?" Judge Thompson nodded thoughtfully. "You're right to think about those voices," he said, "but your story has given them a chance to be heard. You've started a conversation that needs to happen, not just in our courts, but everywhere." Marcus sighed, running a hand over his face. "I just hope it leads to real change," he admitted. "I don't want this to be another headline that fades away in a week." The judge smiled faintly. "Change takes time, Marcus, but you're planting seeds. And sometimes, those seeds grow faster than we expect." Later that evening, Marcus decided to attend a community forum organized by a local civil rights group. The event was held in a packed auditorium, with rows of chairs filled with people eager to discuss issues of racial injustice. When Marcus Arrived, he was greeted warmly by organizers and attendees alike. Many thanked him for speaking out and sharing his experience. As he took his seat near the front, he noticed cameras set up around the room. Journalists were here too, ready to document the discussion. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus stood up and approached the podium. For a moment, he simply looked out at the crowd, taking in their faces. There were young people, old people, black, white, brown, all united by a shared desire for fairness and equality. It gave him a glimmer of hope. "Thank you for having me here tonight," he began, his voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in his chest. "What happened to me at the courthouse last week wasn't unique. It's something many of you have experienced yourselves, or know someone who has. Racial profiling isn't just an inconvenience, it's dehumanizing. It tells us that no matter how hard we work, no matter how much we achieve, some people will always see us as less than human." His words resonated deeply with the audience, drawing murmurs of agreement and nods of understanding. Encouraged by their reaction, Marcus continued, "But I refuse to let that define me, or us. We deserve better. Our communities deserve better. And if my story can help spark a movement toward accountability and reform, then I'll use my voice however I can." By the end of his speech, the room erupted in applause. People lined up afterward to shake his hand, share their own stories, or simply thank him for being brave enough to speak out. One woman, tears streaming down her face, hugged him tightly. "My son went through something similar last year," she whispered. "Thank you for standing up for him and for all of us." In the weeks that followed, Marcus threw himself into advocacy work. He partnered with organizations fighting against racial profiling, using his position as a state attorney to amplify their efforts. Together, they drafted proposals for policy changes within law enforcement agencies, emphasizing the need for implicit bias training and stricter oversight. They also pushed for transparency, urging departments to release data on stops, searches, and arrests broken down by race. At the same time, Marcus became a regular presence at public events, whether it was speaking at rallies, testifying before legislative committees, or appearing on talk shows. He seized every opportunity to keep the conversation going. His message was simple yet powerful. Justice must apply equally to everyone, regardless of race, gender, or background. One particularly memorable appearance came during a televised town hall meeting hosted by a national news network. Sitting alongside activists, academics, and government officials, Marcus shared his perspective on the challenges facing marginalized communities. When a moderator asked him what he hoped to achieve through his advocacy, Marcus didn't hesitate. "I want to live in a world where my children and everyone else's children can walk into any building, any neighborhood, any institution and be treated with dignity and respect," he said. "That's not too much to ask, is it?" His answer drew widespread praise, with viewers calling in to express their support. Social media exploded with hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" and "End Racial Profiling," further amplifying the call for reform. Even celebrities joined the conversation, using their platforms to highlight the importance of addressing systemic racism. Meanwhile, the FBI's Internal Affairs Division launched its investigation into the incident at the courthouse. Agents involved in the altercation were questioned extensively, and surveillance footage from that day was reviewed multiple times. While the process was slow-moving, rumors began circulating that disciplinary action might be taken against those responsible. Though Marcus appreciated the effort, he knew punishments alone wouldn't solve the problem. What mattered most was changing the mindset that allowed such incidents to occur in the first place. To ensure accountability, Marcus worked closely with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at preventing racial profiling in public spaces. The bill included provisions for mandatory training programs, independent review boards to investigate complaints, and penalties for violations. It was ambitious, but Marcus believed it was necessary. "We can't keep pretending these issues don't exist," he told reporters during a press conference. "If we want true justice, we have to confront the biases head-on." As momentum grew, so did opposition. Critics argued that the proposed reforms would hinder law enforcement's ability to protect the public. Some accused Marcus of playing the victim, dismissing his experiences as isolated incidents rather than symptoms of a larger problem. Online trolls attacked him relentlessly, flooding his social media accounts with hateful comments and threats. But Marcus refused to back down. If anything, the backlash only strengthened his resolve. He reminded himself why he started this journey, to create a world where no one had to endure what he went through. With each challenge, he grew more determined to push forward. Months had passed since the courthouse incident, and while life seemed to return to some semblance of normalcy for Marcus Johnson, the ripple effects of that day continued to shape his journey. The investigation into the FBI agent's conduct dragged on, with updates trickling in sporadically. Meanwhile, the legislative reforms Marcus championed gained traction, sparking heated debates both inside and outside government chambers. Though progress was slow and often frustrating, Marcus refused to let setbacks deter him. He knew that change rarely came easily, especially when it challenged deeply ingrained systems of power. One crisp morning, as Marcus walked into his office, he found a small envelope waiting on his desk. It bore the official seal of the FBI's Internal Affairs Division. Curious, he opened it carefully and began reading. The letter acknowledged the mishandling of the situation at the courthouse and expressed regret for the unfortunate misunderstanding. While the apology was formal and lacked personal accountability, it marked a significant step forward. Admitting fault was no small feat for an institution as powerful as the FBI. Marcus read the letter twice, his emotions swirling between relief and skepticism. On one hand, the acknowledgement validated his experience and confirmed what he already knew. Racial profiling was alive and well, even within agencies tasked with protecting citizens. On the other hand, he couldn't help but feel that words on paper weren't enough. What about the countless others who hadn't received apologies? What about those whose stories never made headlines? For Marcus, this wasn't just about closure. It was about ensuring that no one else faced similar indignities. Later that day, during a meeting with advocacy groups, Marcus shared the letter with his colleagues. Some celebrated it as a victory, proof that public pressure could yield results. Others were more cautious, warning against complacency. "This is a start," Marcus said firmly, addressing the room. "But we can't stop here. An apology doesn't fix the system. We need real action, policies that hold people accountable and prevent these incidents from happening again." As weeks turned into months, Marcus threw himself into pushing for legislative reform. His efforts paid off when lawmakers introduced a bipartisan bill aimed at combating racial profiling in law enforcement. Dubbed the Fair Justice Act, the proposed legislation included several key measures: mandatory implicit bias training for all officers, independent oversight committees to investigate misconduct, and stricter penalties for violations. Most importantly, it required law enforcement agencies to collect and publish data on stops, searches, and arrests, broken down by race, gender, and age, a critical step toward transparency. The introduction of the bill sparked nationwide discussions, drawing praise from civil rights organizations and criticism from critics who argued it would undermine police effectiveness. To counter misinformation, Marcus embarked on a media tour, appearing on television shows, podcasts, and panel discussions to explain the bill's importance. During one particularly memorable interview, a host asked him why such sweeping changes were necessary. "Because justice should be blind," Marcus replied without hesitation. "But right now it's not. Too many people are judged based on stereotypes rather than facts. This bill isn't about punishing law enforcement. It's about holding them accountable so they can rebuild trust with the communities they serve." His response resonated with viewers, earning the bill widespread support. Petitions circulated online urging Congress to pass the legislation. Activists organized rallies in major cities, chanting slogans like "No justice, no peace," and "Accountability."
Now.
Even celebrities joined the movement, using their platforms to amplify the message. Despite the growing momentum, opposition remained fierce. Critics accused Marcus of pursuing a personal vendetta, claiming that his experiences didn't reflect broader realities. Online trolls launched smear campaigns, spreading false narratives about his motives. One viral meme depicted him standing in front of a courthouse with the caption, "State Attorney or Special Victim." The image angered Marcus initially, but he soon realized it played into his favor. Each attack only fueled public sympathy and strengthened resolve among his supporters. Amidst the political battles, Marcus found solace in smaller victories. Local law enforcement departments began implementing pilot programs inspired by the Fair Justice Act. In one city, officers wore body cameras equipped with software designed to flag potentially biased behavior. In another, community leaders partnered with police chiefs to host town halls where residents could voice concerns directly to authorities. These initiatives may have been modest, but they represented tangible progress, a sign that change was possible if people worked together. At home, Marcus struggled to balance his activism with his personal life. Friends and family noticed how much weight he carried on his shoulders. His wife, Sarah, often reminded him to take breaks and prioritize self-care. "You're doing incredible work," she told him one evening over dinner. "But you can't pour from an empty cup. Remember to breathe." Her words struck a chord. Marcus realized he couldn't fight every battle alone. He needed allies, not just in the courtroom or on Capitol Hill, but in everyday spaces too. Inspired by her advice, he started mentoring young attorneys, sharing lessons learned from his own career. He also volunteered at local schools, speaking to students about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. One afternoon, as Marcus prepared for yet another hearing, he received an unexpected call from Judge Thompson. "I thought you'd want to know," the judge said, his tone unusually upbeat. "The House Judiciary Committee just voted to advance the Fair Justice Act. It's headed to the full chamber next week." Marcus froze, the phone pressed tightly to his ear. After months of tireless effort, the bill was finally moving forward. "Thank you for letting me know," he managed to say, his voice thick with emotion. This means everything." When the news broke publicly, celebrations erupted across the country. Supporters gathered outside courthouses, holding signs that read, "Justice for all" and "Change starts now." Social media lit up with messages of gratitude for Marcus and everyone else who had fought tirelessly for reform. For the first time in a long while, Marcus allowed himself to feel a flicker of hope. Still, he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Passing the bill through the Senate would require navigating partisan divides and overcoming entrenched resistance. Lobbying. Groups representing law enforcement unions opposed the legislation, arguing it placed undue burdens on officers. They launched aggressive ad campaigns portraying the bill as anti-police, hoping to sway undecided voters. Determined not to lose ground, Marcus doubled down on his advocacy efforts. He met with senators, testified before committees, and mobilized grassroots networks to keep pressure on lawmakers. Every setback only strengthened his resolve. "If we give up now, we're telling future generations that justice isn't worth fighting for," he told a packed auditorium during a rally. And I refuse to send that message. The Senate chamber buzzed with anticipation as lawmakers debated the merits of the Fair Justice Act. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled notes furiously, and activists filled the gallery, their presence a silent but powerful reminder of the stakes involved. Marcus Johnson sat in the front row, his eyes fixed on the podium where senators took turns arguing for or against the bill. This was it, the moment he had been working toward for months. The legislation that bore his hopes and dreams now hung precariously in the balance, subject to political maneuvering and partisan gridlock. For weeks leading up to this day, Marcus had crisscrossed the country, rallying support for the bill. He spoke at town halls, met with undecided lawmakers, and appeared on countless news programs to explain why the reforms were necessary. His message was simple yet compelling. If we want justice to be blind, we need systems that hold everyone accountable, not just some people. But despite his best efforts, resistance remained strong. Critics argued that the bill would hamstring law enforcement, making it harder for officers to do their jobs effectively. Others dismissed it as unnecessary, claiming racial profiling was an exaggerated problem. Marcus knew better than anyone how deeply rooted these biases were. He thought back to the courthouse incident that had started it all. The humiliation, the frustration, the sense of helplessness. Those feelings weren't unique to him. They echoed in the stories of countless others who had faced similar injustices. That's why he refused to let cynicism win. Every voice mattered, every story counted, and every vote in the Senate could tip the scales toward progress or regression. As the debate wore on, Senator Hayes, a staunch opponent of the bill, rose to speak. A veteran politician known for his fiery rhetoric, he launched into a tirade against what he called overreach by activists. "This bill isn't about fairness," he declared, slamming his fist on the podium for emphasis. "It's about tying the hands of our brave men and women in uniform. It's about undermining public safety in the name of political correctness." Marcus clenched his jaw, gripping the armrest of his chair tightly. He wanted to stand up and shout back, to remind the senator of all the lives ruined by unchecked bias, but he stayed seated, knowing that losing his temper wouldn't help. Instead, he leaned over to whisper something to Judge Thompson, who sat beside him. "We've got this," Judge Thompson reassured him quietly. "Stay focused." Moments later, Senator Patel, one of the bill's co-sponsors, stepped up to counter Hayes's arguments. Her voice rang out clear and steady as she addressed the chamber. "Justice isn't just a word, it's a promise," she began, her gaze sweeping across the room. "But promises mean nothing if they're broken. Right now, too many Americans feel like the system has failed them. Too many parents fear sending their children out into a world where they might be judged not by their actions, but by the color of their skin. This bill isn't about punishing law enforcement. It's about rebuilding trust. It's about ensuring that everyone, regardless of race or background, is treated fairly under the law." Her words struck a chord, drawing murmurs of agreement from both sides of the aisle. Even some of the bill's skeptics nodded thoughtfully, seemingly moved by her passion. When she finished speaking, the chamber erupted in applause, a rare display of unity in an increasingly polarized environment. After hours of heated discussion, the final vote was called. Marcus held his breath as senators cast their ballots, electronically, the results flashing on a screen above the podium. One by one, names lit up, green for yes, red for no. The tally grew closer with each passing second, keeping everyone on edge. Finally, the numbers settled, 52 in favor, 48 against. The Fair Justice Act had passed. Cheers erupted in the gallery, echoing through the chamber like thunder. Activists hugged one another, tears streaming down their faces. Reporters scrambled to capture the historic moment, while lawmakers exchanged handshakes and pats on the back. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, followed by an overwhelming sense of pride. They had done it. Together, they had pushed the needle forward. But as the celebrations continued around him, Marcus couldn't shake off a nagging thought. Passing the bill was a victory, yes, but it wasn't the end of the fight. Laws alone couldn't dismantle centuries of systemic racism. Real change required more than ink on paper. It demanded action, accountability, and cultural shifts that went beyond legislative chambers. As he stood to leave the Senate floor, he reminded himself of this truth. The work was far from over. In the days following the vote, media coverage of the Fair Justice Act dominated headlines. Pundits praised its potential to transform policing practices, while critics warned of unintended consequences. Marcus spent much of his time addressing concerns, clarifying misconceptions, and urging communities to stay engaged. Passing the bill was step one, he told a crowd during a press conference. Step two is implementation, and that's where you come in. Hold your local leaders accountable, demand transparency, be part of the solution. His call to action resonated widely, inspiring grassroots movements to take root across the nation. In cities large and small, citizens organized workshops, hosted discussions, and collaborated with law enforcement agencies to foster dialogue and mutual understanding. Officers participated in implicit bias training sessions, often sharing candid reflections about their own struggles with prejudice. These interactions, though sometimes uncomfortable, laid the groundwork for healing fractured relationships. Meanwhile, Marcus continued using his platform to amplify marginalized voices. He partnered with advocacy groups to launch a national campaign called Voices for Change, aimed at collecting personal stories of racial profiling and discrimination. Thousands of submissions poured in, each one a testament to the resilience of those who refused to be silenced. Together, these narratives formed a mosaic of lived experiences, highlighting the urgent need for reform. One particularly poignant story came from a young woman named Maya, whose brother had been wrongfully arrested after being stopped for driving a luxury car in a predominantly white neighborhood. They saw him as a threat because of his skin color, she wrote in her submission. But he was just a kid trying to make something of himself. He lost his scholarship, his job prospects, he lost everything, all because someone decided he didn't belong. Reading Maya's words, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was why he fought so hard, not just for abstract ideals, but for real people whose lives had been shattered by injustice. If the Fair Justice Act could prevent even one such tragedy, it would be worth every sleepless night, every heated argument, every ounce of energy he had poured into the effort. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Some law enforcement agencies resisted implementing the new measures, citing budget constraints or logistical hurdles. Others complied reluctantly, treating the reforms as mere formalities rather than opportunities for meaningful change. Marcus understood that shifting entrenched mindsets wouldn't happen overnight. It required patience, persistence, and unwavering commitment. To address these obstacles, he worked closely with community leaders and policymakers to develop practical solutions. Pilot programs were launched in select cities, testing innovative approaches to reducing bias and improving accountability. In one initiative, officers wore body cameras equipped with AI technology designed to detect potentially discriminatory behavior. Early results showed promising reductions in complaints, though critics questioned the ethics of relying on algorithms to monitor human conduct. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast. He attended meetings, reviewed data, and listened intently to feedback from stakeholders on all sides. His ability to bridge divides earned him respect even among former adversaries. Marcus doesn't just talk about change, remarked Chief Daniels, a police chief initially skeptical of the reforms. He rolls up his sleeves and gets to work. You don't see that kind of dedication very often. Years had passed since the day Marcus Johnson stood outside a courthouse, humiliated by racial profiling and determined to turn his pain into purpose. The journey that began with indignation and frustration had transformed into a lifelong mission. Testament to the power of resilience, courage, and collective action. Though the scars of that morning never fully faded, they became markers of growth, reminders of how far he, and society, had come. The Fair Justice Act was now law, its provisions slowly reshaping policing practices across the nation. Law enforcement agencies implemented mandatory implicit bias training programs, while independent oversight boards reviewed complaints with renewed rigor. Communities once divided by mistrust began rebuilding relationships, thanks in large part to grassroots efforts spurred by Marcus's advocacy. Yet for all the progress made, challenges remained. Racial profiling hadn't disappeared overnight. It lingered like a shadow, stubbornly clinging to corners of the system. But Marcus refused to let setbacks overshadow victories. Each small step forward mattered. One sunny afternoon, Marcus found himself standing on a stage at a national civil rights conference. Thousands of people filled the auditorium, their faces reflecting hope, determination, and gratitude. Many had traveled long distances to hear him speak, to draw inspiration from the man who had turned personal adversity into societal change. As Marcus adjusted the microphone and scanned the crowd, he felt a mix of emotions: pride, humility, and an unshakable sense of responsibility. "Thank you for being here today," he began, his voice steady but warm. "When I think about where we started and where we are now, I'm reminded of something my father used to say. Change doesn't happen because it's easy. It happens because it's right. The audience erupted in applause, prompting Marcus to pause and smile before continuing. This fight isn't mine alone. It belongs to everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. To every parent who worries about their child walking home late at night. To every officer willing to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves and their profession. And to every citizen demanding better, not just for themselves, but for future generations. His words resonated deeply, drawing nods of agreement and murmurs of encouragement. Marcus went on to share stories of individuals whose lives had been touched by the reforms. There was Maya, whose brother regained his footing after years of struggle, thanks to mentorship programs funded under the new legislation. There was Officer Ramirez, who credited bias training with helping him see the humanity in those he served. And there were countless others whose quiet acts of bravery contributed to a larger movement toward justice. But Marcus didn't shy away from acknowledging the work still ahead. Passing laws is important, but it's not enough, he emphasized. We must continue holding ourselves accountable at every level of society. From classrooms to boardrooms, from city streets to courtrooms, we have to challenge biases wherever they exist. Because true equality isn't achieved through policy alone, it's built through empathy, understanding, and relentless effort. As he concluded his speech, Marcus stepped back from the podium and gestured toward the audience. This isn't my story, it's ours. Together we've shown what's possible when we refuse to accept injustice as normal. Let's keep going. Let's keep pushing. Because when we stand united, nothing can stop us. The room exploded in cheers, the sound reverberating like thunder. People rose to their feet, clapping and chanting Marcus's name. For a moment, he simply stood there, taking it all in. The culmination of years of hard work, sacrifice, and belief in a brighter future. After the conference, Marcus returned to his office, exhausted but fulfilled. On his desk lay stacks of letters and emails from supporters thanking him for his leadership. Some shared updates about local initiatives inspired by his work. Others expressed gratitude for giving them the courage to speak out against discrimination. One note, written in careful handwriting, stood out among the rest. Dear Mr. Johnson, I'm writing this letter as someone who doubted whether change was possible. Watching you turn your experience into action gave me hope. Thank you for showing me that even the smallest voices can make a difference. With admiration, Emma. Reading Emma's words brought tears to Marcus's eyes. He realized that his impact extended far beyond headlines or legislation. It lived in the hearts of people who saw themselves in his story and found the strength to fight for what was right. In the months that followed, Marcus continued advocating for reform, though his approach evolved. Rather than focusing solely on high-profile campaigns, he shifted his energy toward mentoring young activists. He believed that nurturing the next generation of leaders was key to sustaining momentum. At workshops and seminars, he encouraged participants to embrace vulnerability, listen actively, and lead with compassion. You don't need a title to create change, he often said. All you need is conviction and the willingness to act. He also prioritized self-care, recognizing that burnout could derail even the most passionate advocates. Sarah, his wife, played a crucial role in keeping him grounded. She reminded him to take breaks, spend time with family, and celebrate milestones along the way. Their 2 children, now teenagers, often joined him at events, learning firsthand about the importance of standing up for justice. Seeing them grow into empathetic, socially conscious individuals filled Marcus with immense pride. Despite occasional moments of doubt, Marcus remained optimistic about the future. He knew that systemic racism wouldn't vanish entirely during his lifetime, but he also knew that each victory laid the foundation for greater progress. By the time he retired from public service decades later, the world looked markedly different. Policing practices had become more transparent and equitable. Schools taught curriculum centered on diversity and inclusion. Conversations about race, once taboo, were now commonplace. On the day of his retirement ceremony, colleagues, friends, and family gathered to honor his legacy. Judges, lawmakers, and activists took turns sharing anecdotes about how Marcus had inspired them to pursue justice fearlessly. When it was his turn to speak, Marcus kept his remarks brief but heartfelt. "When I first entered this field," he said, smiling at the crowd, "I thought success meant winning cases. Over time, I learned that true success lies in empowering others to carry the torch. If my life has taught me anything, it's that justice isn't a destination, it's a journey. And as long as we keep moving forward, together, we'll leave this world better than we found it." As the ceremony ended, Marcus stepped outside into the cool evening air. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink, casting a golden glow over the city. For a moment he paused, reflecting on everything he had accomplished and everything yet to be done. Then, with a deep breath, he walked toward the horizon, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Marcus Johnson's story wasn't just about overcoming prejudice. It was about transforming pain into purpose, anger into action, and despair into hope. Through his unwavering commitment to justice, he proved that one person truly could spark a movement, and that together, humanity could overcome even the deepest divides.